Bullying, cyberbullying, and school violence. Today brings part one of our two-part focus on bullying, only seen right here on A Healthier Charlotte. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of A Healthier Charlotte. I'm your host, Bobby DeMuro. Bullying has recently been a popular topic among families and in classrooms across the country, and we are no different locally here in the Queen City. Today on A Healthier Charlotte, we'll take a look at bullying, cyberbullying, and school violence with a special guest panel in the first part of our two-part mini-series on this very important topic. Let's kick it off right there and meet our guests today on the panel. First, Beverly Penninger is a documentary filmmaker based here in Charlotte who recently finished a documentary on bullying amongst young people that we'll talk about today. Next to her is Dr. Kelly Bolton, a psychologist at Southeast Psych here in town. And Dr. Bolton, you're now maybe the 10th person from Southeast Psych we've had on, so you're in good company. And finally, next to me, Josh Alexander is a student at the Northwest School of the Arts who has seen bullying firsthand and might just be the most qualified person to discuss this out of all our panel guests. Welcome to the show, everybody. Josh, the floor is yours. No, I'm just kidding. But you, seriously, now let's start with you because you may be the most qualified person. You see this firsthand. You see this, happen among kids in school. What's the effect on young people right in the moment when bullying takes place? How do you judge how people react to this sort of stuff?
Well, I feel like it's one of those things that it's very difficult because it's an individual reaction. And some people will take it, as a joke, and some people will take it a lot more seriously. And it's those people who take it a lot more seriously that really brings it into being a serious topic that needs to be discussed. And when you see it happening to people, it's really demoralizing because it creates a negative atmosphere in the school, and it creates a negative atmosphere all around and generally brings the mood down.
Let's talk about that atmosphere, Beverly, because seeing this on the documentary, I mean, an hour documentary, you shoot hundreds of hours of footage. You are really, really involved in that sort of stuff. Do we have a grasp on this, or are we just all talking about keywords and we know bullying is an issue, but we can't really pin it down to know exactly what this does to kids right in that moment? Are we kind of missing the point on this topic?
Well, no, I mean, I think we're all pretty clear on what this does to kids. I think what it does to people. I think probably the bigger dialogue, in my opinion, is the fact that bullying exists on lots of levels. I think we see it in politics, in the corporate world, lots of different environments, and not just among young people.
Yeah.
But I do think the solutions probably are going to come from young people, however. But I do think it's a serious issue, and I think there are a lot of people, some of whom you're going to talk to with these two episodes, who are really trying to make a substantive difference.
Let's stick with you now for a second. I know you can only speak to what you saw on the documentary, what you filmed, and you can't speak for the nation. But
no.
Is bullying at an epidemic level? If we can play the media game again and see how they over-sensationalize things. Is it really that bad, or is it being overdone in the media? And it's a serious topic, but we need to maybe not give it as much attention as we are.
No, I think it's important that we give it a lot of attention. I think there's a lot of gravitas around this subject. That bullying has always existed. I think that the greater awareness now comes out of the representation of the media, out of social media, out of the fact that we have such access to communication tools that weren't there, say, in my generation when I was in, Josh's age. But no, I do think it's a serious issue. I think anytime people are being hurt or damaged emotionally, you can't ignore that.
You can't. Yeah, you can't. That's actually. That's the best word. You can't ignore it. Dr. Bolton, same question to you. Are kids getting meaner? I mean, do you see this more clinically that kids are coming to you, young people are coming to you looking for help on this? Is it that it's getting to become a bigger issue, or maybe we're just better at identifying it?
I think we're getting better at identifying it. I think we're developing a better understanding of what bullying is, and just as Beverly was saying, those nuanced forms of bullying and the different avenues that they come through. And I think because of that, we're able to name it, we're able to identify it, and then we're also able to start to address it a little bit better.
What about for you, Josh? I mean, excuse me, when we can talk about kids getting meaner and bullying has always existed, I mean, you don't care about that. The history doesn't matter when you were a kid in the moment experiencing this on whatever. And how do you cope with that? I mean, do you run away? Do you remove yourself from the situation? I mean, what's an easy way for young people right now to cope with it? And maybe seeing how they cope with it, how could adults better understand to deal with young people who experience this?
I think that when it comes into coping with it, you can't cope with it. It's something that when you have to deal with people, for 8 hours a day, like you do in school, and then you come home, and some kids who get bullied also get bullied at home from kids in their neighborhood, even in the home. And it's one of those things that when you say, oh, people, we need coping mechanisms, it's very difficult to cope when you're surrounded, when a kid is surrounded 24/7 by bullying and by hurt. And a lot of kids, because of this, will turn to things like drugs and alcohol to try and cope. And what that does is it makes it worse. It brings the problem down into a more serious. I mean, bullying is already serious, and it's causing even kids' lives. But when you get into drugs and alcohol, you're making it even worse.
Well, and you mentioned the 24/7 cycle, and let's talk about that, because a big one, and Beverly hit it too, was Facebook and Twitter and the web and social media. Is that a big issue, or again, are we overblowing it in the media, or do kids feel threatened because of the internet literally 24 hours a day?
Kids, I think, can feel threatened 24 hours of the day due to the internet, because what it does is it makes a kid an accessible target no matter where they are.
Yeah.
No matter where they are, what they're doing, or who they're with, they can become a target. And some might say, it's as simple as, turning off the phone or turning off the computer. But sometimes, kids go home and there's nobody there for them, and they want to be able to reach out because they might have friends who don't live near them, but, accept them for who they are, but they live far away. And so they can't talk to these people either if you just, turn off a phone or a computer. And it doesn't make the actions any more justified. And I feel like cyberbullying is becoming that tool because it's so widely used.
Beverly, follow up with that. When you looked at this, doing the documentary, I know you did a lot of stuff person to person, looking at bullying in school, in the workplace, things like that. What about the cyberbullying aspect? Is that something that people are maybe aware of, or are we still a few years from really understanding what's happening there?
Oh, I think there's a pretty clear understanding that that's happening. We didn't delve into it a lot in the program because there really wasn't any of the subjects that we included in the program that had experienced it to that degree. But I think it's pretty apparent through a lot of the suicides that have taken place and the issues that are happening that cyberbullying is a big part of the puzzle.
Dr. Bolton, we'll talk about this on the second episode. We have a couple people to talk about the legal aspects, but from the psychological perspective, maybe the more clinical perspective, can we define bullying? I mean, what constitutes bullying? Is there a set definition, or does it kind of depend on the situation?
No, we have a pretty good kind of scope of understanding of what this definition is. And in general, it's any kind of unwanted, intentionally aggressive behavior that may happen repeatedly, and where there's a power imbalance between the parties involved.
Yeah.
So intentional, unwanted, power imbalance, generally it's going to be repeated.
So that definition sound good to you?
It sounds good to me. I pretty much said the exact same thing and from the heart, so.
And that maybe sounds more technical, but that's what it gets at. It's one young person who, rightfully or not, feels that they're maybe better than another one. I mean, is that what it comes down to?
Pretty much. I mean, from my own experience, I went to a nerd school, basically, highly gifted, high IQs, high academic push. And a lot of families, there are horror stories of, kids, getting a 95 and, being scared to come home.
Yeah.
When, in CMS, it'd be like, woohoo, 95. But it's definitely that power imbalance because, I did well, but I didn't do as well as some of the kids. And, that could create a power imbalance. Somebody says, well, he's not as smart as us, so maybe we can take that out on him.
Let me tell you now, I went to a gifted school, and I'm now the coolest person anywhere. So you're in good company. Give it a few years, right? Maybe not. Maybe not. Well, Dr. Bolton, what about the effect? I mean, obviously I know that the effect of bullying is going to be different on different kids, but is there a prognosis that we can look towards when somebody comes to you for maybe professional help to cope with something or to recover from something? Is there a prognosis and kind of a dialogue where we know that they will get better in a certain amount of time?
I think it's going to kind of vary from person to person. It's going to vary in terms of, what stage it's been caught. Is it kind of early on before it's become this chronic, month after month, year after year kind of experience, or just how long has this been going on, and what are the resources around that individual? So there are a lot of factors that do mediate this piece, but some of the effects for individuals who've been bullied are increases in anxiety, depression, sadness, loneliness, all of those, kinds of negative emotions that can then lead to withdrawal, changes in sleeping and eating patterns that, particularly for kids, can certainly affect their development, mentally, physically, across the board. But then we also see decreases in academic achievement.
Yeah.
That can happen as well. And that's, I don't know that I would say often, but a lot of the time that's one of the things that I start to see for the kids that come in. Their grades are dropping, their attendance is dropping, they're starting to feel sick. They're starting to feel like they have headaches and tummy aches and things like
They
that.
participate less.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Beverly, in your experience, seeing this kind of firsthand through film, are we devoting enough resources to this at schools, at clinics, maybe with parents? I mean, are we doing enough right now to, we'll never stop it, but are we doing enough right now to hold it back?
No, as long as it's continuing, we're not doing enough.
Yeah.
I think that for me, the thing that I walked away from this project with is that we collectively as a society have to create a culture of empathy and compassion. And we don't do that. We support negativity and the very thing that bullying stems from. And I think that's, to me, was the critical piece, is we have a choice, and to be kind is a valid choice. And until we do that, it's going to continue to be a problem.
Well spoken. Stick around, guys. Segment 2 coming up. I want to keep talking to you guys. Next up, though, on our show, our favorite blogger, Kelly Davis, talks nutrition. We have got her in the kitchen cooking up healthy, easy-to-prepare meals right now. Healthier Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Kelly from FoodieFresh.com, and today I want to talk about trade-offs that you can make in your diet to make sure you're not compromising the taste or flavors or textures that you really like, but still making sure that your diet is healthy and you're incorporating all kinds of good foods. One of the hardest things I think is to do when you're incorporating healthy foods is when you're baking, incorporating healthy things that you can substitute to make your food just a little bit healthier. Applesauce is your best friend if you like to bake. You can use it in granola, brownies, bars. The consistency is going to be a little bit different, but what you're using it for is as a substitute for oil. So when you're trying it in your favorite recipes, you might want to start off by doing, if it calls for a cup of oil, do half a cup of oil and a half a cup of applesauce. You might find that just a little bit more applesauce instead of the oil is something that you like, or you can tolerate and you still like it just as much. So applesauce is one of my favorite things to substitute in baking. Another thing that I really like to do, and the first time someone told me about this, I thought, gosh, that sounds disgusting. But then when I tried it, I really liked it. And that's to use black beans when you're making brownies. You've probably heard of this before, but I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it. Take any box of brownie mix that you really like. I love the Ghirardelli dark chocolate. That's my favorite kind. And then take 1 can of black beans. Sometimes it's 15 1/4, 15 1/2 ounces. Whatever you have will do. Put it in a blender, blend it up with the liquid. Then you're going to take your brownie mix and put it in a bowl. Put the black beans with the liquid in the bowl. Sometimes it calls for water, so add your water, whatever it calls in the back of the box of brownies. Do not add oil, do not add egg. This is your substitute for your oil and your egg. So you're immediately taking out a lot of the fat. You've veganized it if you are on a vegan diet, and it's absolutely delicious. You can't tell that there's any beans in it whatsoever. Even the batter tastes good. It's really delicious. You can bake it for the exact same amount of time you typically bake brownies, and that's a really easy substitute. It's not exactly a lot less calories, but what you're adding when you add the black beans is a lot more fiber and a lot more protein. So I find that while I might eat a brownie and want to crash and burn in a couple hours, or I want to eat the entire plate of brownies, if I add the black beans instead, it's more filling, so I feel a lot better after I eat it. Another thing you might want to do if you are using sugar in your baking or you're in your cooking is to switch to a more natural alternative for sugar. So I really like using sugar in the raw, which hasn't been processed and bleached the same as typical white sugar. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's definitely worth your health to invest a couple more dollars in, especially if you're not using much sugar. One thing that I have trouble with sometimes is laying off the soda, but what I really like with the soda isn't necessarily the sugar, it's the fizz. So if that's something that you really like, you can switch to a flavored sparkling water. This is really delicious. This comes from Trader Joe's. It's lime. They have all kinds of flavors. So you can get different sparkling waters at Harris Teeter, all different kinds of grocery stores. If you're missing the sweetness, add just a few drops of your favorite juice, and that'll bring the flavor up just a little bit, and you still have that fizz and that sweetness, and it's delicious and doesn't have all that bad sugar and bad caffeine that is incorporated in most sodas. I love Greek yogurt and use it as a condiment for all kinds of things that I eat. I like to put it on top of soup. I use it on my tacos in place of sour cream. You can use Greek yogurt for all different kinds of things. Anything you would put sour cream on, which for me is a lot of different things, I use Greek yogurt. With my salads, salads are very healthy most of the time, but one of the ways that we can go wrong with salads is putting on a really fatty or really oily dressing that doesn't incorporate good fats and it has a lot of sugar. One of the things that I do is I use hummus instead of salad dressing. I'll just put a big blob of hummus on there, and with every little bite of salad, I'll get a little bite of hummus. It's a lot healthier. Another thing I might do is put a little balsamic vinegar on it, and sometimes I even put a little bit of honey. Some of my favorite salad dressings have a little bit of sweetness to them, so I'll just drizzle a little bit of balsamic, a little bit of honey. Sometimes I do honey and lemon juice, and then I shake my salad up. I usually have it in a Tupperware container for lunch, and it gets incorporated throughout the salad. It's really easy to make your own salad dressings using the things you have on hand. You could even mix some of the hummus with the balsamic and make a healthier salad dressing. So these are just some very easy, simple things you can do to incorporate healthier foods in your diet by making simple trade-offs that will allow you to keep the flavor, keep the texture, things that you really love in your diet without compromising your health. If you want more ideas, follow me at foodiefresh.com. Thanks, and have a nice day.
Welcome back into A Healthier Charlotte and part 1 of our focus on bullying and school violence. Let's jump back into it. And Dr. Bolton, I want to start with you. Really broad question and a whole lot of causes, but I mean, what is causing this bullying? Let's dive deeper into the power imbalance and maybe this culture of empathy that Beverly was talking about in the first segment. What's behind some of the causes of bullying just generally?
Yeah, they're numerous.
Yeah.
They're numerous causes, and they're very layered, I think. But, anything from problems at home, lack of parental involvement, kids that maybe in general are more aggressive or easily frustrated and don't necessarily have good coping skills and ways to handle those kinds of experiences, and then it starts to escalate from there. Variety of causes in that regard. And then I think kind of more generally, in terms of types of kids and things like that, we also see some kids who may tend to be a little bit more withdrawn or isolated from their peers that don't necessarily have as much social support themselves, their lack of self-esteem, things like that then produces more bullying-like behavior. And then we also see it from the other side, those that are very well connected to their peers, and they have more of that social or relational power where they maybe even enjoy some of that and perhaps abuse it at times.
Josh, where do things change then? Because this is another generalization, but first grade, second grade, third grade, everybody plays together and, you have cooties and stuff. I don't know if people still do that, but you have that sort of stuff. But then what happens in fifth grade or middle school? I mean, can you pinpoint some of these causes and why some kids turn to bullies and some kids have to then become victims?
Well, nobody has to become a victim. That's and that's part of the major thing that I think is part of the cause of bullying. But I think that what happens is you start getting treated a little bit more like an adult, and that gives you a little bit more of a sense of power. And then that goes back to that power imbalance, because when you feel like you have a little bit more entitlement or a little bit more power, that you start to abuse that, because absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think that you make that transition from, being a little kid in cooties and, jumping around, and they don't still do that. But
I'm not that old.
But you go from that to more of a, things start to get a little bit more serious.
Yeah.
And when things get a little bit more serious, sometimes that pressure comes down. And that can turn some kids into bullies and some kids into victims. And
Dr. Bolton, I think we have a future psychologist on our hands here.
I think we might.
Yeah. Well, Beverly, let's look at root causes from your perspective. I can't help but think that if we can define some of these causes, if we know that, if a kid is maybe parented a certain way, they will more likely become a bully. If we do things like that and catch these sort of trends early, Does that help change this, or am I off base with that?
I would think absolutely. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I'm not
Absolutely.
a
I think
psychologist.
that's one
Like,
of
this
the
is all
keys.
just from a layman's point of view. But I think when children see their parents argue, or a parent is being abusive to either the child or their spouse in front of the child, when they're angry in the car and say, speak profanity in the car, if somebody cuts them off. These are things that kids model that behavior.
Yeah.
They see it, they behave that way. So I think there's a very important role in adults in that we model the behavior that we want to see. I think it's also kids. I think it's stepping up when they see someone being bullied, because 9 times out of 10, that's going to diffuse the situation and stop it. I think every single person, school administrators, everybody has a part.
What about that third party, that kid that you just mentioned stepping up? Josh, from your perspective, we have a bully, we have the kid getting bullied. If the third party comes in and steps between and says, you know what, this isn't right, does that maybe diffuse the situation better than an adult coming in and punishing somebody more traditionally?
It really does, because there's, that old adage, snitches get stitches.
Yeah.
And so when you have an adult come in, somebody's going to get blamed for that, and it's just going to make the bully angrier and build more hatred and resentment. And from my own personal standpoint, from 4th grade, starting that transition into middle school and starting that transition towards bullying, I had a friend named Michael, and when I would get bullied, he stepped in and they left me alone, because I had a friend, I had an ally, and Michael wasn't big, he wasn't strong, he wasn't particularly anything necessarily special to maybe say, don't mess with him. But what he did was, it was that diffusing. And when there's somebody on their side, victims feel more empowered, and they're more likely to stand up and say, I'm tired of this.
Yeah.
And the bully doesn't feel as confident, and that diffuses that power imbalance.
And it's the idea of isolation. When you have somebody on your side, you're no longer isolated. Yeah. Power in numbers.
Power in numbers, that herd mentality.
Yeah. Yes. Dr. Bolton, I can't help but think, too, with this, is there enough psychological health focus in schools, and maybe not just in schools, I don't want to just blame schools, but is there enough of a focus on psychological health when we raise our kids to prevent things like this, or are we really missing what maybe is a bigger monster laying in wait when these kids grow up and they have to deal with much more serious issues, whether it's domestic violence and things like that, where they carry these behaviors on?
I do think there is a lack of psychological health, and I don't think it's necessarily from a lack of want, to be there or want to do something. I think some of it really is influenced by, financial constraints and time constraints and all kinds of pieces that start to tug and pull. But the reality is that we do need more empathy building in the schools, and it needs to start very early. We do need more social skill building in the schools. Kids need to learn how to navigate conflict in positive ways. They need to learn how to care for others and serve others, and building that back into the curriculum is a piece of that psychological health that we need to build.
Beverly, something else that maybe is related on the periphery is kind of the larger issue of school violence. When we look at, things like Columbine, those are very few and far between, probably not even worth talking about because they're so exceptional in their own instance, but just the more general culture of violence. You mentioned the culture of empathy. What's this connection to the culture of maybe violence that we have in this country that's sort of pushing some of these behaviors?
Well, so I think it is a very valid point. Now, unfortunately, Columbine was so far removed from where we are today that a lot of young people don't even have that as a benchmark. But the boys who perpetrated that were bullied horribly. To me, I think that speaks volumes that was a reaction, I think, a direct reaction to them being bullied.
Yeah.
And there's a story I wanted to share with you, Bobby, that it goes back to that empathy piece, is that when I was in high school, I was on a senior trip, and there was a young man that went on the trip. Now, he wasn't bullied by anyone on the trip, but he was ignored. And we all knew he was bullied horribly at school, and none of us attempted to reach out to him or include him. No, we didn't bully him, but a few months after we returned from the trip, he killed himself. And I couldn't help but think, what if we had included him? What if we had just made him part of the fun? So we played into that. So it's not just that direct one-on-one bully versus victim. It's we all play a small part I think, and just trying to help people feel more comfortable and at ease with who they are.
Yeah. Josh, when I think about the future and where some of this stuff is headed, you are, not to give you too big of a head, but I mean, you are very well spoken, you're very poised. I have a feeling, I don't want to say most kids are not like you, but because we have some smart young people around here, but maybe most kids aren't ready to talk about this on a serious issue like you are. Do we need more young people to get comfortable to have these conversations, whether it's with adults or other young people? And do they need to kind of open up to each other, whether they're a bully or a victim or not involved? Does that help the situation overall if they start talking?
I think that when you get that discussion going, it makes bullying less acceptable, because part of what it is, you've got victim bully peer group. And what happens is that peer group encourages the bully by laughing when that bully takes their anger out on the victim. And it builds that power that the bully has.
Yeah.
It builds that bully's feeling of power. And they start to gain a circle. And those people become bullies. And these people become bullies. And it's an ever-expanding thing. And when you get the discussion opened up and people realize, kids kill themselves because of this. And the next time that you say, oh, look at that fag, or, just general insults, because there are a lot of things
even
that are
insults
said.
without thinking, yeah.
There are a lot of things that are said that would be nice to repeat on air. But it's one of those things that when you deal with that whole power imbalance, when you see that person saying things like that to someone else and you don't do anything, you're building that person's power.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, we all not only have a small part, we all have a huge part in this. The administration, and I feel like adults a lot of times seem like, oh, we're adults. If we get involved with this, everything will be better. But I think that what a lot of people don't realize is kids don't want to talk to adults because it's a very us versus them mentality. And, we're the new generation, and part of our job is to point out flaws in the old generation and improve. And what happens is when adults try to get involved sometimes it turns out for the better, but sometimes it builds more resentment. And sometimes an adult won't see the entire situation and will, in fact, help further that bully's power.
Yeah.
But when you get talking about it and administrators get informed, and when people get informed, administration's not always going to do something, but when you get talking and people put more pressure onto the administration, and when people put more pressure onto the bullies and onto the peer group to do something about it and realize that it's a very real matter of life and death for a lot of kids, then I think that's when we start to be able to get back into humanity.
I had a big conclusion, and that's it right there. I don't even need to do anything. Thank you guys for coming on. Dr. Josh Alexander, I await your PhD ceremony here in a minute. And guys, thank you guys at home for joining us on the show this week. We're out of time this week on A Healthier Charlotte, but I want to remind you to visit cltblog.com for more unique news, info, and current events here in the Queen City. And look out for the second part of this focus on bullying next episode right here on A Healthier Charlotte. For our guests on the panel and our crew here in studio, thank you so much for joining us this week. I want to remind you that as you go along, and this is pertinent here, you don't need talent, you just need courage. I'm Bobby DeMuro, and this has been A Healthier Charlotte.